Hello, welcome back. This is Writing About Illness, Healing Diaries. I am going to just do a review of the reading this week for you, this first lesson, which is on terminologies, definitions, using language to describe illness, pain, the experience of dealing with disease. And we have 5 authors, Virginia Woolf, Susan Sontag, Joan Didion, Esme Wei-Jun Wing, and Eula Biss on the same subject, and exercises which revolve around the essays. So I'm going to just give you a sort of quick highlights right now. I did discuss Woolf a little bit in the introduction to the course. She is foundational. Many of the writers are reacting to her essay on being ill from 1926. But we are going right to the present time with our readings and even pieces and memoirs that are literally coming out this month. So that's kind of exciting because they're right on the cutting edge of the writing that's happening on illness and disability. And I'm looking forward to seeing those for the first time. So to resume with Woolf and on being ill, Woolf mentioned somewhere midway in her essay, this paragraph appears, and she notes what happens to language when we try to use it to describe illness. Finally, among the drawbacks of illness as a matter for literature, there is the poverty of the language. English, which can express the thoughts of Hamlet and the tragedy of Lear, has no words for the shiver and the headache. But let a sufferer try to describe a pain in his head to a doctor, and language at once runs dry. That note, let a sufferer try to describe a pain in his head to a doctor, and language at once runs dry, is probably a very familiar feeling that we have all had. And Eula Biss uses that as a starting point for her essay, some 90 years later, in the pain scale, where she tries to offer kind of a numerical system for pain. She uses a familiar drawing that appears in a pediatrician's office as her jumping off point. It's kind of an image to keep in mind, but she plays with each number of 1 to 10 and through kind of a free association of what each of these degrees could mean in terms of pain. So just to go to Biss for a moment, she gets, I think, starts to really hit her stride when the pain intensifies. She is describing her own chronic and worsening, I think it's a back and neck pain. Her father is a doctor, and she is in discussion during this essay, in conversation with him, on how patients report pain and how a doctor interprets that. When she gets to number 5 or so, she starts talking about how children conflate pain and feeling. They feel emotional about something, and that is painful, and that is something to keep in mind that adults have that too. But it's kind of this existential question of what it is pain when we have such a hard time describing it. What are we referring to? At number 5, which is the average for reported pain, she then moves to the Beaufort scale, which is a weather monitoring, and she describes strong breezes, large branches in motion, telegraph wires, whistle, umbrellas are used with difficulty. That's actually number 6, and this is where I think her essay is successful. That kind of imagery of a storminess that is outside of us. In fact, it's raining right here in Glasgow right now, and the wind is picking up as I'm speaking. That sort of is a kind of a projection, is very literary, but it also it registers with us that there's a kind of storminess happening inside of our bodies when we are dealing with disease. She from there starts to descend towards the Inferno, Dante's Inferno. Imagination is treacherous. It erases distant continents. It builds a hell so real that the ceiling is vulnerable to collapse. Now, when we get to that kind of this pain that can be a torture, that is a kind of underworldly pain, then we are really in this other domain that is outside of our everyday and kind of subterranean. And Dante does indeed describe that world of torment, and it kind of immediately conjures some of the very worst that our imagination can hold on that realm of distress. Number 8, she turns on its side and associates with the symbol for infinity, which is very clever. And at number 9, she begins to discuss pain as suffering. Having been sleepless for nearly a week, I rated my suffering as 7. Pain is the hurt, either physical or emotional, that we experience. Suffering is the story we tell ourselves of our pain. And to underline that as well, suffering is the story we tell ourselves of our pain. She brings up Christian iconography, and being not Christian herself, she appreciates the bloodiness and the piercings of Christ as these symbols of pain, pain as agony and anguish, and that pain at that level is perceived as holy and suffering as divine, and she tries to reach that through her own rationalization that her pain is that bad. She's dealing with something out of the ordinary that touches the existential. So her pain scale is a ladder of pain, and it sort of steps up and down in degrees, from the unnoticeable pain to total devastation to unsustainable pain. I've given you an exercise to try to come up with your own way of describing pain, no matter if that is trivial or very intense, in whatever way that you want to, if you can, in words, by mentioning colors or textures or certain rhythms or certain sounds. Just feel very free with that. I'm just looking for a creative response. So I'm going to now backtrack to Didion, who in her In Bed, which was a sort of light essay on illness and migraine, some of the passages to note from her essay: when I'm in a migraine aura, for some people the aura lasts 15 minutes, for others several hours, I will drive through red lights, lose the house keys, spill whatever I'm holding, lose the ability to focus my eyes or frame coherent sentences, and generally give the appearance of being on drugs or drunk. There was what certainly is what doctors call a migraine personality, and that personality tends to be ambitious, inward, intolerant of error, rather rigidly organized, perfectionist. You don't look like a migraine personality, a doctor once said to me. Your hair's messy, but I suppose you're a compulsive housekeeper. Actually, my house is kept even more negligently than my hair, but my doctor was right. Nonetheless, perfectionism can also take the form of spending most of the week writing and rewriting and not writing a single paragraph. This may all be familiar to us. Does that make us migraine personalities? So this is a problematic equation that Didion wants to point out. She's definitely frowning on this doctor and these ways of seeing the disease as being a matter of personality or even of character. And that is where Susan Sontag really focuses in and digs her heels into the material at illness and its metaphors. Susan Sontag wants to overturn a social history of associating disease with the sufferers. It's not two different things, but that the sufferer is to blame, and that language helps us to see disease as a class-based, as personality-based, as male and female. So her essay is very interesting, very important, kind of, I think, in the studies of on trying to conceive of disease and on language for medicine. And I have uploaded the original lecture from 1977, which I encourage you to listen to, or you can read the whole essay. But she is really steeped in the literary tradition, mentioning Thomas Mann and Keats and De Quincey, and how these authors kind of played with the romance of tuberculosis, or the canker of cancer. So, and those are her two diseases. Where we end this lesson is this book, which just came out in 2019. Esme Wei-Jung Wang, who is in her 30s, has written a book called The Collected Schizophrenias, which is actually a collection of essays on her disease, which is schizophrenia, but also Lyme, as she learned more recently. And just to give you a few passages from this, because this essay is sort of what I'm drawing from as far as my exercise that I've assigned on definitions and trying to come up with categories and the language which pertains to your particular project. She uses the DSM, which is a kind of a compendium of psychiatric illnesses, and she starts off the essay writing, schizophrenics are victims of the Russian word gibel, which is synonymous with doom and catastrophe, not necessarily death nor suicide, but a ruinous cessation of existence. We deteriorate in a way that is painful to others. So that's the first of her words, is that Russian gibel. And then she also we'll go to the DSM subtypes of schizophrenia. For now, psychiatrists choose to rely on the DSM-5, which means that changes in the Bible of psychiatry continue to affect people's lives. The definition of schizophrenia changed with the DSM-5. Schizophrenia's subtypes, paranoid, disorganized, catatonic, and undifferentiated, no longer exist in the new DSM, which means, among other things, that pop culture has lost paranoid schizophrenia as a diagnosis upon which to hang criminal acts. The 5 key symptoms are listed as delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized or catatonic behavior, and as negative symptoms. So right there, she's showing how these categories start slipping and how they're very much human-made, and that means, of course, that they're full of biases and error as well. So this is the first chapter of her collection, and I've assigned that to diagnosis. She also I'm just looking for the section that's on the roots of schizophrenia, which I seem to have lost. But I will give you a page number for that. So yes. The end of her essay. For causes and explanation, there are still other avenues to pursue. 9 months after my diagnosis of schizophrenic disorder, when I was beginning to experience serious physical symptoms as well, fainting, chronic pain, allergies, weakness, my psychiatrist sent me to the complementary and alternative medicine consult, a division with the HMO. The doctor, a Southeast Asian man, looked at my tongue. He used the Chinese 3-finger method of examining the pulse in both my wrists. He told me that my problem was obvious. It was a classic case of fire typology that had burned out of control, therefore explaining my ambitious personality, pain, inflammation, anxiety, depression, and symptoms of schizophrenia. He indicated a few acupuncture points that I could try, included one dip of my sternum called the Sea of Tranquility. He advised me to eat less meat and fewer spices. Another take on illness, which is the non-Western, the alternative, and she is labeled as having too much fire. So these labels, categories, definitions are everywhere. We are used to them, and I just want you to question them a bit and to see which ones pertain, which ones are relevant to the kind of illnesses, the disabilities that you are interested in writing about in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. So check out the exercises. Let me know your questions, and I hope you write a ton.